Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recordings of Shostakovich's Symphony No. 1. Now, the first symphony is an amazingly precocious work. Shostakovich was, I think, 19 when he wrote it. It was a graduation exercise. It was immediately taken up by all the great conductors of the day, including Bruno Walter and Toscanini, who recorded it pretty well. And, Koussevitzky did it, and it was amazing. He was an incredibly talented composer from the get-go. And the first is not what you might yet call fully mature. It has some elements from elsewhere, but so much of it is immediately Shostakovich. It sounds so much like Shostakovich. It's a little bit schizophrenic in that the first two movements are in that sort of dry, sardonic, witty, in-your-face, almost Dadaist mode. And then all of a sudden the slow movement begins seemingly in the middle of nowhere. It starts with that oboe tune right on the first beat, and there's no introduction, no nothing. All of a sudden, you're in another world, and it's a deeply sad, serious. It's real, the expressive Shostakovich that we know, the lament, that kind of thing, the klagend Shostakovich. It's wonderfully moving music, and then the finale itself, the symphony never quite recovers. After that finale. The finale is a blend of the character of the first movement with some of the expressive intensity of the slow movement, and it shares thematic material. Because as you know, the slow movement has this fanfare, dum, ba-da-da, da-dum, like that. And in the finale, Shostakovich just turns it upside down. So it goes bum, ba-da-da, da-dum, like that. And gives it to the solo timpani and the big central climax and things like that. So it's a well unified work. It's just tremendous. It really is. And it's received quite a number of fine recordings and some very, very good singleton recordings, which is really kind of nice because I get to talk about some other conductors instead of pulling out all the usual complete sets and saying, oh yeah, remember this? I mean, I have some of those too. You have to, because everything's been boxed up nowadays. And so, you have to pull out the boxes. So let's just get to it. I have a dozen of them here. And as I have said a million times, you may have favorites that are not part of my dozen, and that's just fine, because there are certainly more than a dozen excellent recordings of the First Symphony. But I think a dozen is more than enough. And if you pick any of this dozen, any of these, you will be very, very well off for Shostakovich's First Symphony, which is the whole point, isn't it? So first, Maris Jansons, and this is with the Berlin Philharmonic. This cycle, his Warner or EMI cycle or whatever it is actually with a whole bunch of different orchestras. Shostakovich was definitely one of Jansons' great strengths as a conductor. He had a real identification with the music. He conducted it extremely well, and it's a marvelous performance. It really is. It's very well shaped. It's intelligent. It gets moving right away, and it just keeps the tension going right through the end. Now, I do have certain preferences, by the way, particularly in the first movement, because the first movement, is it's deliberately fragmented. All of the motives and melodies are presented soloistically by tiny orchestral groups or by individual wind players, and very lightly accompanied. And I don't like performances like the recent, what was it, Boston Symphony with what's his name, who's with the Boston Symphony. It's just terrible, because what happens is that there's a tendency for conductors to take each little separate motive and make it separate. And it's not necessary. It's absolute. Andres Nelson's. Sorry, I lost it. That's what Nelson's does. The trumpet is ya da ba ba. Then the bassoon comes in do do do, and the clarinet comes in the violins. You don't have to have its own tempo and its own phrase. Everything's in parenthesis. The whole secret of playing this movement well is making it continuous, catching the flow underlying, the rhythm underlying all of these witty interjections and asides that seem like they're coming out of nowhere. You want to put them together, not separate them more, because they're already separate. Shostakovich does that for us. And I'm just saying that's how I sort of regard that. And that's the problematic movement. All the rest of them really play themselves. There's never a problem, virtually never a problem with any of these performances. And so Jansons does that well, and so do all of these performances. Another one that does it extremely well is Kurt Sanderling. Now, Sanderling is a conductor, this is what the Berlin Symphony Orchestra, who is usually very grim. And, the more nasty and dark things are, the happier he usually sounds. And surprisingly, this is an extremely unsentimental, clear-eyed, idiomatic performance with remarkably swift tempos. It's take no prisoners, straight ahead, exactly the way Shostakovich, I think, wanted it to sound. And it's just a splendid performance. All of these Berlin Classics Shostakovich performances are just fantastic. They really are. And so that's a performance that you may overlook because you may think that Sanderling would be a little plodding or the work is not tragic enough to suit him. But if it isn't, he makes it tragic enough to suit him because the slow movement is quite gripping. But the rest of it is totally in character too. And he doesn't minimize any of the music's sardonic elements at all. So Sanderling is worth considering. Also worth considering is this SACD with Mark Wigglesworth on Bis. Now, this is one heck of a disc because you get symphonies 1, 2, and 3 all together. Partly that's because the tempi are rather swift. And let's see, it's an 81 minute and 13 second CD. Now, I reviewed this on ClassicsToday.com, and you can go have a look at that review if you're curious. The first symphony is quite good. The first movement is a little bit, it's very balletic and a little bit lightweight, but it's okay. And then it gets better and better as it goes. And by the finale, it's going like gangbusters. It's just terrific. The second symphony is also excellent. The third is a bit of a letdown. It's the orchestra is the Netherlands Radio Philharmonic. You just need more punch and guts from the brass players in the third because they have very important solos. There's that huge trombone solo before the chorus comes in. And it's just a little too tepid for my taste. But the first is quite good. And you can, if you have the complete cycle, you have this first, or you can you hear it separately as a download or do something like that. But I mean, having 1, 2, and 3 all together still it's a good deal. It really is. It's worth considering just because of that, even if the third isn't wonderful. The second's terrific, and it has a real factory whistle in it. A very strange sounding factory whistle, but it is a factory whistle in F sharp. I mean, they found one somehow, and they'd used it. So there you go. A very good Shostakovich 1. Now, of course, it's always good to hear Maxim Shostakovich play Dmitri Shostakovich, and this is his cycle on Supraphon with the Prague Symphony Orchestra, which is quite a good cycle. It's grown on me over the years. The first symphony, I mean, the orchestra has those very, very Eastern European qualities with very perky woodwinds and sort of woodsy, watery horns, and I like the sound. I really like the sound in this music. He doesn't have to work his butt off to create all of those captivating but highly disparate sonorities that Shostakovich expects in the way that he orchestrates the work generally. So this is definitely worth considering. If you don't have this cycle, the whole thing is worth considering. And it's very well recorded and nicely played, and it's very exciting, and I enjoyed it enormously. Next. We have a lot of them here. We do, well, no, I said 12, right? So 12, okay, it's enough. Rostropovich. Rostropovich's Shostakovich was always very sincere, but not always successful. And this cycle had some real letdowns, like number 10, which I thought would be wonderful. It really wasn't. It's actually most of the ones he did in the UK with the London Symphony. Those are the bad ones. The other stuff that he did with the National Symphony and with, of course, in Moscow, the 14th, which is insane with his wife, with Galina Vishnevskaya, it's just unbelievable. But this is a very good first. It really is. Rostropovich is another one of those conductors who was always willing to let the orchestra, strut its stuff and have lots of personality and character, and it does. It's just a very, very fine performance. So as part of this cycle, it's a highlight. It really is. It's definitely one of the better ones. And we, of course, have to mention our cycle du jour, which is Petrenko, who is our avatar of Shostakovich throughout this series, because his whole cycle is excellent. It really never puts a foot wrong anywhere, even though some performances are better than others. But it's an amazing cycle. And this is a very, very fine performance of the first. Again, it's very coherent. Extremely coherent, especially in that first movement. And this comes with just the third. You don't get the second as well, but it's a better performance of the third than the Wigglesworth. So there you go. It's with the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, and it's just terrific. So consider Petrenko. If you're collecting this cycle, you already have it again, and you've got a terrific first. You really do. Oh, this is a pleasure. Ancerl with the Czech Philharmonic. This is fun. Oh, the Czech woodwinds. It's just worth hearing for them alone, to hear the clarinet, to hear the bassoons gurgling along. It's just tremendous. This has one defect. The defect is this. The slow movement and the finale are linked. There's a transition, and the transition is a snare drum roll that leads to a woof on the tam-tam and a chord and a cymbal thing, and then a little recitative, like by a woodwind something or other, and then the finale takes off. I didn't have the LP of this. I never did, but I'm assuming that there was a side turn there, and as a result of that, the finale just begins. In other words, they don't actually play the transition. I mean, all the music's there, all the notes are sort of there, but there's an actual pause, an ending of the slow movement, and then it sort of picks up where the finale begins. So it's a little different from all the other versions as a result of that. And the first time I heard it, I was just like, wait a minute, that's not right. There's something there. And there was probably nothing they could do about it back in those days, because it was recorded for LP release, and that's how they did it. And what can I tell you? But the performance itself is absolutely splendid. So this is not your first version, perhaps, because of that little boondoggle leading into the finale, but in all other respects, it's worth having, and it comes with a really great fifth, and so what the heck? I'm not complaining. I'm just pointing out the musical facts for you. Oh, yeah. And here's a wonderful Shostakovich first, a real sleeper. This is the sleeper Shostakovich first, the one that very few people know about, although some of you do, because you've mentioned it. I can always count on you folks to set me straight, or to mention the thing that I think nobody will remember to mention. You'll mention it. I mean, that's part of the fun of doing these things. You're keeping me on my toes. Martinon. Yes, he did it with the London Symphony Orchestra, and it's a first-class performance on Decca, if you can still find it. It actually has been around. I think it's on Eloquence as well. It's sort of around and available, and it's definitely available. It's like a Japanese Decca at some ridiculous price. But Martinon was Martinon. He was just a great conductor. He wasn't known for doing Shostakovich, but of course he did do a complete Prokofiev cycle. He was fine with Russian music. There's some Prokofiev on here too. An absolutely horrible Fifth Symphony and a pretty good Seventh. But this first, the Shostakovich first, is first rate. Absolutely first rate. And, anything by Martinon is certainly usually worth listening to. I always have to qualify these things, because one thing we have all learned doing this together is that there are no absolutes and there are exceptions to every generalization when it comes to this stuff. Nobody was uniformly great all the time. No one. But some people were uniformly great most of the time, and Martinon was one of those, without a doubt. You should also consider, in the field of Russian performances, Rozhdestvensky. This is that screechy cycle with the USSR Ministry of Culture Symphony Orchestra, recorded in absolutely paint-peeling, eardrum-piercing, lacerating, early digital Russian sonics. And I have to say, when this thing came out, this version of it came out on, it was a Melodiya BMG thing, I think, at the time. Yeah, it's BMG. And I don't know if you can still find this. I have no idea. But they fixed the sound to a great degree. And but this is a hard edged. I mean, it's brutal, absolutely brutal, raw and edgy and fun to listen to. The piano chords at the end of the scherzo, the scherzo comes up with that da 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 da. It's doing the big climax. It stops, and then the piano goes, bum, bum. Just those chords, those sledgehammer chords. I don't know what they were using to make those sledgehammer chords, but this piano did not survive the experience. I assure you, it was kindling by the time they got done pounding on it. And, that's the kind of performance it is. It's one of those upfront, in-your-face, totally unsubtle Russian performances. It's, it's like tanks rolling into Ukraine. I don't mean to joke about it, but that's the kind of, pulverizing personality that Rozhdestvensky gives it. And, the music can take it, and there's room for that musically, not geopolitically, but God knows. But there is certainly a musical point, and it's a very exciting performance. And like I said, it's uniquely brazen. Perhaps that's the word. Not as brazen as Ormandy in Philadelphia, but just because it isn't brazen, that doesn't mean it isn't fabulous. Ormandy, I have to say, Ormandy was one of those guys who was really good at continuity. Maybe that's why he was such a great concerto accompanist, too. He always knit everything together. He might not have been the most exciting guy out there, but he made everything work and sound logical. And it works fabulously well in the First Symphony. Because, you can have, there are a couple ways of doing it. You can highlight the sort of schizophrenic contrast between the first couple movements and then the slow movement and all that. Or you can somehow try and stress the continuity of line and have it all make sense. And that's what Ormandy does. And when you have playing that's as good as the Philadelphia, it works wonderfully well. It really does. He's another conductor who is able to realize all of the character and color in the disjunct orchestral timbres of the first movement without ever making it sound like it's ready to fall apart. So this is an absolutely fantastic performance, and it's coupled with the classic version of the first cello concerto with Rostropovich, which was amazing, which Shostakovich heard and was like going, wow, when he heard the Philadelphia Orchestra play this stuff. So it's just fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and it's on Sony, and it's probably still buzzing around too. However, if you want to hear Shostakovich's first, I mean, all of its youthful glory and enthusiasm, you must listen to Bernstein. And he did it twice. There's the Chicago one that's coupled with that unbelievable Leningrad Symphony. And then there's the original New York Philharmonic one. And these were very well recorded, coupled with a very good Symphony No. 6. Now, they are both superb performances. The second one, the Chicago one, is a little bit slower, a little bit heavier, a little bit. Hasn't lost anything of its character. But I prefer the first one with the New York Philharmonic only because it just has that extra youthful kick that I think the music really needs. There's also a fabulous video of Bernstein. I think he's at the Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival teaching this piece to a youth orchestra. And I remember specifically or particularly, when the clarinet has its first entrance, when it goes, he could not get that clarinetist to play with the necessary personality, to be insolent enough, to have as brazen a timbre as he felt it needed. So he actually assigned it to another clarinetist. He said, you do it. You show him how to do it, he was saying. Bernstein, everyone talks about how wonderful he was as a teacher, and he was. He was an incredibly charismatic teacher. But if he didn't get what he wanted or what he thought the music demanded, he was merciless. And completely, he wasn't being mean or nasty. He was just saying, he tried. He gave this person all these opportunities to play it, and they just couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. It just goes to show you that so much of this music is about the personality of the performers, not just the conductor, but the performers themselves as individuals and as soloists. And Shostakovich always was that way. he gave his players wonderful, wonderful opportunities to express, to be individuals, to be personalities, big personalities. And Bernstein understood that. He wanted his players to have that big personality. Now, God knows Chicago has big personalities, and so did New York. They always did. But this first is just amazing. It's absolutely perfectly paced, totally in character, and really exciting when you get into the finale, but with the slow movement that's full of crepuscular passion. That's the term, crepuscular passion. I think it just has that twilight unease that Shostakovich was going to exploit to such fabulous effect in all of his later music, and I just adore this performance. So Bernstein is my guy for Shostakovich's Symphony No. 1. But like I said, any of these will do you. They are wonderful, wonderful performances. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.